This is the new Ncore 100 Max. Now, if you're familiar with the NR200P Max or the NZX TH1, then you'll be familiar with the idea behind this one. Just like those other two, the Ncore 100 comes packaged as a kit, meaning it includes some pre-installed components to simplify the entire build process. Now, this could be a great choice for you if you're thinking about building an ITX PC, but you don't want the hassle or to spend the time researching component compatibility on a small case, and you'd prefer just to have your PC up and running as fast and simply as possible. The complete package here comes in at $399 US, and it includes the case, of course, a 120mm liquid cooler, an 850 watt 80 plus gold SFX power supply with a 12 volt high power cable included, and a PCI Express Gen 4 riser cable. At first, that $400 price point does sound a bit high, but once you do consider the power supply alone costs $160, a decent Gen 4 riser cable can be found around $40 to $70, and a decent 120mm AIO can be picked up for around, $60 to $80, then it looks like they are valuing the case itself for roughly $120 or so, which is actually not too bad, especially with the added convenience of having all of those pieces already pre-installed. Now, there are a couple of colors to choose from. We've got a bronze finish as well as a stealth gray. The bronze looks a little more muted in person than I was expecting, but it still looks really nice. I don't think I've seen a case color quite like it. It does stand out and it becomes kind of a showpiece on your desk. Of the two though, I still think I might go with the gray option, but I think that's just because I'm just a pretty boring person when it comes to the color of my devices. Checking out the build process and taking a look inside the accessories box, we got a secondary top cover, which is needed for some of the larger graphic card options. You get a few different power supply cables if you need them. Now, because the 12 volt high power cable is already pre-installed, if you're running a card that uses a standard 8 pin, you can get those from here. Then under the top cover is a bag of hardware that we'll use for installing the AIO. Now, this should be everything that we need, whether you're building for Intel or AMD. In my case, I'll be going with AMD. And if you're curious, I've got a 7800X3D plugged into an Asus X690 and 32 gigs of low profile DDR5 6000 RAM. And so for an AMD board, the pump is actually just going to use the default brackets that are actually already installed on the board. So we don't need to install anything extra at this time. Now, if you are going with Intel, then you would need to use the backplate and install the mounting hardware before securing the board into the case. Okay, so getting into the case can be a bit confusing the first time. What you need to do is pull out the push pins on the back side like so. Then there are push pins holding the other side in as well, but they're actually pointing this way towards the back. So we need to pull the panel towards the back to release them. Then the same idea with the other panel. We can actually remove this front brace by unlocking it from the top and the bottom and then moving it out of the way. Okay, so now that we can start building, I'm going to take out our brackets for the water block. These are going to be different depending on if you're using Intel or AMD. The ones I have here, again, are for AMD, and so I'm gonna attach those onto the block. I've already removed all the packaging from inside here and removed all the twist ties from the case cables and power cables, so it does all look a little bit like a mess. Let's just kind of move everything to the side and make room for the motherboard, and then just secure that down in with the included screws. Okay, so we have some case cables to connect. We need to plug in our USB 3.0, USB-C, and then the front panel connectors. Then there's also a HD audio connector if your board supports it. And at the top, we have a rear exhaust fan that we can plug into our chassis fan connector. Then don't forget that there is also a long fan cable coming from the top mounted radiator that we need to connect into our CPU fan header. Then we just have our CPU power cable and our motherboard power cable. Now, lastly, we have our PCI Express cable that's just kind of hanging out here at the bottom, right where we need it. So let's just go ahead and plug that into our PCI Express slot like so. Now, this is actually pretty tight and a little difficult to get your hands in, especially if you have a larger M.2 heatsink on your motherboard like I do here. Still, I'm able to reach in there and get it plugged up without removing that heatsink. There should be some thermal paste that comes in the box. I'm gonna use some that I actually already have opened, but what comes in the box should be fine. So we can apply that to the CPU and then lower the water block onto the CPU and secure it. This is meant to be finger tightened only. There are no Phillips head inserts on the top or anything like that. So just try to tighten it the best you can, switching off every few rotations to get an even pressure. Now we're almost done on this side. All we have to do is plug in this wire coming off the block into our pump header on the motherboard, and that's pretty much the hardest part done. After doing a little bit of cable management, this is what I ended up with. So now we can flip our case over to plug in our graphics card. So in this default position, the case can support a 3-slot GPU up to 337mm in length. But if you need to support an even longer one, you can actually move the riser cable and this bottom piece here that holds the GPU down to a second lowered position to allow a card up to 357mm. Because I mostly do small builds on this channel, I don't actually have access to a card that large. So the card I'll be testing is going to be using the default position. So the GPU I want to try out is the Founders Edition 4090. So this is a blow-through style cooler. So what that means is it's gonna take fresh air in from this fan here and then exhaust hot air from the opposite side, which is gonna hit right up against this wall. Now, I noticed that the documentation is showing a founder's card in all of their examples, so I'm just really curious to see what the thermal performance will look like when using one. Hopefully this exhaust fan at the rear is able to effectively remove all that hot air when this card is getting put to heavy use. It's important to note that in these sandwich style cases, a traditional cooler like a triple fan setup that you'd see on a third-party GPU is usually a better choice in this layout, but I still wanted to see how a founder's card performed. Now, installing the card is very simple. All you gotta do is remove these 3 covers, open the latch on the riser cable, and then slot the card in like so. It couldn't be easier. Last, we can just plug in our 12-volt high power cable, and that's basically it. We can reattach the front bracket, pop on the side panels, and go check out the thermal and gaming performance. All right, now that the PC is ready, let's get the most out of it with the help of this video sponsor, private internet access. Now, you may already know, but a virtual private network, or VPN, hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. Private internet access shields your digital life from your internet service provider, network admins, and government censors from seeing your data by running your data through its world-class encryption server infrastructure. Put it this way, using the internet without PIA, it's like forgetting to mute your microphone during an online match. Everyone definitely heard your mom scream for you to come upstairs from the basement and wash your hands because the meatloaf is ready. Private internet access is also great because it allows you to watch content from all over the world. Streaming services like Netflix only show you region-specific content, but using PIA's VPN helps you overcome these restrictions by allowing you to change your address to one of its 84 available countries, unlocking shows and movies you wouldn't normally be able to watch. With its no logs policy of never recording or storing user data, PIA has protected over 30 million users and has been proven countless times in court that your data is always protected. You can protect unlimited devices with just one account, so not just your new build, but your phone or tablet too, since it runs on Windows, Mac OS, Android, Linux, and iOS. Private internet access is fast enough to even support P2P file sharing. Click the link in the description for 83% off your private internet access subscription. That's just $2.03 a month. They're even giving my subscribers an extra 4 months completely free just for signing up. Registration is simple and risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee and customer support there for you 24/7. So something to note here is because of the GPU's orientation, you have to put the case on its side in order to access your DisplayPort and HDMI ports. This is a lot like the NZXT H1, but unlike the H1, you have access to all of your motherboard I/O right from the back. So that is far more convenient. I expect that most people will only be plugging in their display cables once, while you would need to frequently access your USBs. All right, so I've got Windows installed, along with a few games and benchmarks to try out. And the first thing I wanna do is see how the 7800X3D thermals look with this 120mm cooler. So running the new Cinebench 2024 CPU multi-core stress test, I'm seeing my 7800X3D max out at 84 degrees Celsius. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I also wanted to test out the new GPU stress test here in Cinebench just to see how the 4090 fared. And that actually maxed out at only 49 degrees Celsius. But that's just synthetic benchmarks. How are temps when actually gaming? So taking a look at Avatar, the GPU temps are leveling out at 68 degrees Celsius while pulling upwards of 390 watts, which is honestly better than I was expecting considering the sandwich style layout. The exhaust fan seems to be doing a pretty effective job removing that hot air expelled by the 4090. The CPU temps are decent as well at 70 degrees Celsius, although slightly higher in Cyberpunk 2077 at 75 degrees Celsius. System noise when running a standard fan profile is pretty reasonable as well at 43 decibels, which is really where I would probably keep it. But if you're curious on how loud bumping it up to full speed is, I'm measuring it at 46 decibels. Now, these are totally reasonable noise levels and temperatures in my opinion, but how do they compare to this guy? This is the NR200P Max. It's another kit from Cooler Master and has been around for a while now, but this one comes with a much larger 280mm liquid cooler at that same $400 price. Obviously, these are two very different looking cases, but I do think that it's worth comparing them as they are from the same company, at the same price, and are made to accomplish essentially the same goal, which is to simplify the building experience. Running the same CPU stress test in Cinebench 2024, and I'm seeing the temps at 82 degrees Celsius. That's only 2 degrees lower than the new N-Core, which is not as big of a difference as I was expecting. But where the real differences lie is in gaming temps. In Avatar and Cyberpunk, I'm getting an average of 10 degrees Celsius lower when using the NR200P Max. Which again, this isn't surprising considering we are comparing a 120mm radiator to a 280. I would fully expect the 280 to perform better. And that's kind of my point. It just goes to show how good the NR200P Max remains to be, and at that same price point. The N-Core can support a larger GPU at 357mm in length and up to 79mm thick, over the 336 by 75 in the NR200P Max. So you can fit a pretty massive card in here if you wanted to, and that alone might be enough of a reason for some people to go with this one. Now, to be clear though, overall, I do think that this is a great case kit. I really like its overall look. The build quality is excellent, and the build process is streamlined and so simple to follow. I just think that it should have been priced a little bit more aggressively at maybe $350 to make a more enticing proposition when you compare it to what's already offered. So unless you just really love the design or are so limited on desk space that you can't fit anything with a larger footprint, I think my overall recommendation would still go to the NR200P Max. But anyway, let me know what you think about it. Next week, I'll have a review for what is my personal most anticipated case release of the past year. So make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. And if you want to see what else I've got coming up, feel free to follow me on Instagram. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.